I'm sure you have now a better understanding of money laundering, and it's actually an eye-opener to think of how many people do launder money and that they do use real estate to buy our product, the houses and stuff, to hide the money that they became, well, we can call it dirty money through crime. So I'm sure you all have a better understanding of what we will be talking about today. So money laundering involves the methods criminals use to hide and disguise the origin of the money that makes them what they make from their crimes. The term laundering is used because criminals need to turn their dirty money or the criminal money into clean funds that they can use without arousing suspicion. The process by which the proceeds of illegal activities are channeled into lawful commercial dealings, which are designed to conceal the source of the money and also create the impression that the money was legitimately obtained, and it conceals the destination of the money. The money has almost always or is almost always linked to organized crime. Examples of money laundering: for instance, money from bank robberies, cash in transit heists, money earned from drug trafficking, prostitution, drugs, and absolutely, definitely tax evasion. So, what is organized crime? The criminals seek to introduce proceeds of criminal activities into the formal financial system. This can erode a nation's economy. Billions of dollars gets lost. It definitely has a huge effect on the stability of global markets. Terrorist groups get cash to buy weapons. So by taking proceeds of their crime from public officials, traffickers and organized crime groups, it is one of the best ways to stop them in their tracks. Let's look at the money laundering process. First of all, the criminal places the money or the dirty money into the formal financial system. Remember, the minute they purchase something and the monies go into the system, it is washed. So the criminals tries to hide the link between the origin of the ill-gotten gains and the financial system. They do this by entering into a series of complex financial transactions that moves money in and out of various systems so as to conceal its true source. It can happen as follows. A loan to company Y takes place and the company pay on a false invoice to company X, and then monies are wired to offshore banking and then back and forth, and then the money re-enters in the final phase. The criminal reintegrates the money into the formal financial system by buying a house or a luxury car so that it appears to be clean and legit. Once the funds are clean, they can be used for legitimate transactions. So this is where the problem comes in. We will never know if the money is dirty or clean in this whole way of them sending it overseas, back to us again, 3-4 other people, and that is why people battle to track where the money is actually coming from. How does money laundering take place? They make use of different techniques to wash dirty money clean. So dirty money may be used to buy property or luxury items, for instance a yacht, antiques, cars, jewelry, invested in legitimate business ventures, often cash-based business, for example a restaurant, broken up into smaller sums before being deposited into a bank account. It can be used to purchase money instruments, for instance traveller checks. It can be used to buy or sell shares and channel the money through a series of widely scattered accounts across the world. Where does money laundering occur? And I can tell you guys, anywhere in the world. Countries or economies where there are low risks of detection, largely due to poor or ineffective regulation, are particularly attractive to the money launderer. Developing economies are especially vulnerable. However, the ultimate objective is for launderers to enjoy their funds, so they prefer to move in stable financial systems. Since the world became one global village, crime has been influenced as much as any other industry. Modern crime ignores national borders and is frequently international in nature. Because of this, governments have gotten together to create international organizations to fight money laundering on an international scale. So why is money laundering bad? It is important to realize that money laundering has a detrimental effect on the economy as well as on the society because it restricts fair compensation with legitimate business. It reduces tax revenues through underground economies. It disrupts economic development and negatively impacts on society at large. Prior to the Financial Intelligence Centre Act, or in short FICA, South Africa had very little legislation in place to deal with money laundering as we know it today. The old money laundering legislation dealt with the money generated by drug trade. However, in order to bring South Africa in line with accepted international standards, the government took the initiative and introduced the Financial Intelligence Centre Act in 2001. By implementing and monitoring legislation designed specifically to deal with money laundering, the opportunities for money laundering to take place in this country have been reduced. FICA now includes the proceeds of all crimes. All crimes are now included. Nothing is excluded with FICA. South Africa has the following legislation in place to prevent the criminal activities of money laundering. We're going to discuss FICA, POCA and POCTATARA. So let's look at Financial Intelligence Centre or FICA. They criminalises money laundering and it enables investigation and prosecution of money laundering. The financial institutes must provide reports to FICA. It establishes regulatory and supervisory functions in which financial institutions comply with obligations. It also establishes the Financial Intelligence Centre. It enables various law enforcement authorities to share info internationally, and also, just an interesting point, FICA is located in Pretoria. The Prevention of Organised Crime Act. The South African government passed POCA in 1998 as part of its initiative to fight money laundering in the country. The Act defines offences relating to proceeds of unlawful activities that are punishable. This includes money laundering, assisting another to benefit from the proceeds of unlawful activities, and acquisition as well as possession or use of proceeds of unlawful activities. So the main objectives are to introduce measures to combat crime, money laundering, to prohibit certain activities relating to racketeering activities, and to provide for prohibition of money laundering. They also create a general reporting obligation for business coming into possession of a suspicious property. They criminalize certain activities associated with the gangs, provided for recovery or confiscation of the proceeds of crime. The Act does not define racketeering, but provides a definition for a pattern of racketeering activity. This refers to the planned, ongoing, continuous or repeated participation or involvement of offences like murder, rape, corruption, fraud, perjury, theft and robbery, as well as any offence punishable with imprisonment of more than 1 year without the option of a fine. POCTATARA stands for the Protection of Constitutional Democracy Against Terrorist and Related Activities Act. POCTATARA reacts to any person who does anything that will engage in terrorist activity, including providing of skill, or give support, or makes a document that is connected to terrorist activity. They will be found guilty of an offence. So the main objectives of POCTATARA is to make South Africa fully compliant with the United Nations Terrorism Conventions and Protocols, as well as with the African Union Convention on the Prevention and Combating of Terrorism, and to provide for an offence associated with terrorist activities. They also provide for convention activities that give effect to international instruments dealing with terrorists, and they prevent and combat financing of terrorists and to provide investigative measures in respect of terrorist activities. There are many other acts that we can talk about, for instance the Drug and Drug Trafficking Act, Proceeds of Crime Act 76, and they all prevent and prosecute money laundering, organised crime, drug trafficking and crimes involving money. The Financial Intelligence Centre is a heuristic or a legal person and has been set up as an institution outside the public service but within public administration. The Money Laundering Advisory Council is in place to advise the Minister of Finance on policies and best practices to identify the proceeds of unlawful activity and to combat money laundering activities. It also acts as a forum between the FIC or the Financial Intelligence Centre and the accountable institutions that have the responsibility to report in terms of FICA. In turn, the Council is supported by the FIC with respect to administrative staff and finance. The supervisory bodies that we can look at is the Financial Services Board, the South African Revenue Service, SARS, we all know them, the Registrar of Companies, the State Agency Affairs Board, the National Gambling Board, the JSE Securities Exchange South Africa, as well as the Law Society of Africa. What is an accountable institution? A trend has developed whereby the responsibility for identifying and reporting suspicious transactions is legally placed upon institutions and merchants where criminals are likely to try to do business. These businesses or organizations are referred to as accountable institutions. In terms of FICA, there are also reportable institutions which have reporting obligations but are not required to meet the other obligations imposed on accountable institutions by FICA. These would be motor vehicle dealers and dealers in Krugerrands. Who is an accountable institution? Now, I've mentioned a couple there: real estate agents, attorneys, banks and mutual banks, trustees, trust companies, other person that administers trust properties. These are just some of the examples. Others are long and short-term companies, casinos, people dealing in foreign exchange and travelers' checks, casinos and other businesses with gambling licenses, people who lend money to people against security, investment advisors, public accountants and auditors at money remittance. What are the duties of an accountable institution? The institutions have a duty to establish and verify the client's identity and keep the records. They have a duty to report suspicious and unusual transactions, and they have to report certain cash and electronic transactions. They have to formulate and implement internal rules, and they definitely have a duty to train their staff and to monitor compliance. So let's look at the money laundering reporting officer. This person must be a senior employee within the organization. He or she must be free to act on his or her own authority. They must have sufficient time and resources to perform this function, and they must monitor the daily implementation of organizations' anti-money laundering policies. They must be informed of any knowledge of suspicions or any strange things happening in the company. They must pass the information to the regulating authorities and respond promptly to any external anti-money laundering authorities' requests for information. So, suspicious clients. Let's look at how do we know if it's a suspicious client or transaction. Vague or contradictory information or references. If no record of past can be given or even present employment. If they do not appear to have a legitimate business purpose, and if there is a purchase of a property in cash or large deposits where the ability of clients, they definitely a suspect. You need to know your client. Establish and verify the identity of the client with whom the enterprise proposes conducting business, the person representing the client as well as the person for whom the client may be acting. The Act affords an accountable institution such advantages as they need to identify suspicious activity, they need to provide an element of protection against fraud, protecting institutions' reputation, and definitely they have to make sure that they don't have any financial risk due to this fraud. Here is another video to show you guys that real estate is vulnerable and definitely susceptible to money laundering.